My name is Maria Santos, and I'm 62 years old. For the past 15 years, I've been working as a cleaning lady in one of Manhattan's most prestigious office buildings on Fifth Avenue. Every day, I arrive at 6 a.m. sharp, before the executives start flooding in with their expensive suits and even more expensive attitudes. I clean their offices, empty their trash bins, and listen to their conversations they think I don't understand because they assume a cleaning lady from El Salvador couldn't possibly comprehend their sophisticated business dealings. If only they knew the truth about who I really am. The story I'm about to tell you happened on a Tuesday morning in November 2023, in the penthouse office of Harrison Blackwell III, one of New York's most ruthless real estate moguls. Harrison was everything you'd expect from a billionaire who inherited his fortune: arrogant, condescending, and completely convinced that money could solve any problem and buy any person. I was cleaning his enormous corner office, carefully dusting his collection of ancient artifacts and rare books, when Harrison burst through the mahogany doors with his usual dramatic flair. He was accompanied by 3 other men in expensive suits, his business partners, all looking equally frustrated and defeated. "This is impossible." Harrison slammed a thick folder onto his marble desk, making his crystal paperweights rattle. "6 months we've been trying to close this deal with the Montenegro government, and now they're demanding all negotiations be conducted in some obscure dialect that none of our translators can handle." James Morrison, his senior partner, loosened his tie in frustration. "The document they sent us yesterday might as well be hieroglyphics. We've contacted every translation service in the city, and no one can make sense of it." "What about that firm in Boston?" asked David Chen, the third partner. "They claim to handle rare languages." Harrison laughed bitterly. "They took one look at it and said it would take them 3 months just to research the dialect, assuming they could find someone qualified. 3 months. The deadline for this deal is next Friday." I continued cleaning, moving quietly around the room as I always did, invisible to them as I wiped down the surfaces and organized their scattered papers. The Montenegro deal they were discussing was worth $2.8 billion. I'd overheard enough conversations to know the details. Harrison's company was trying to acquire several historic properties in Montenegro to convert into luxury resorts, but the government was being very particular about preserving cultural heritage. "Sir," ventured Thomas Walsh, Harrison's nervous assistant who had just entered the room, "perhaps we should consider withdrawing from the deal. The language barrier seems insurmountable." Harrison's face turned red with anger. "Withdraw? Do you have any idea how much money I've already invested in this project? How many people I've promised returns to? This deal is happening, even if I have to learn this godforsaken language myself." He grabbed the mysterious document from the folder and waved it in the air. The papers were covered in what looked like a complex script with unique characters and diacritical marks that seemed to dance across the page. "Look at this." Harrison continued his rant. "This looks like someone took Latin, mixed it with Russian, and threw in some Arabic for good measure. It's complete gibberish." That's when I recognized the script. My heart stopped for a moment as I realized what I was looking at. The document wasn't gibberish at all. It was written in Montenegrin Cyrillic with Old Church Slavonic legal terminology, mixed with some regional dialectical variations from the northern mountain regions. I knew this because I had spent years studying these exact linguistic combinations during my previous life, but I said nothing. I continued cleaning, invisible as always. Harrison noticed me wiping down his bookshelf and suddenly got that look in his eyes, the same look wealthy people get when they want to demonstrate their superiority to someone they consider beneath them. "You," he called out to me. "Maria, right? Come here for a second." I turned around, maintaining the humble demeanor I'd perfected over the years. "Yes, Mr. Blackwell? Maria, you're from Central America, right? You probably speak Spanish?" "Sí, señor. I speak Spanish." Harrison's partners chuckled, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. He was about to make me part of his little demonstration of superiority. "Well, Maria, I have a little challenge for you." He held up the Montenegrin document with a condescending smile. "This document here is supposedly very important, but it's written in some impossible language that even professional translators can't figure out. What do you think? Can you read any of it?" His partners were now openly laughing. James Morrison shook his head. "Harry, come on, what's the point of this?" No, this is educational," Harrison insisted, clearly enjoying himself. "Maria here probably thinks this is just fancy writing, don't you, Maria? Go ahead, take a look. Tell me what you see." I approached his desk slowly, looking down at the document. The text was absolutely clear to me. It was a legal framework for cultural preservation requirements in historic property development, with specific clauses about maintaining architectural integrity and respecting local traditions. "I see, words, Mr. Blackwell. Many words." "Exactly." Harrison slapped his desk triumphantly. "Just words. Meaningless scribbles to someone without proper education." He turned to his partners. You see, gentlemen, this is the difference between education and ignorance. To Maria here, this might as well be random marks on paper. David Chen looked uncomfortable. Harry, this seems unnecessarily cruel. Cruel? I'm making a point about value, David. This document represents billions of dollars, but to someone like Maria, it's just, what would you call it, Maria? Chicken scratches. I looked down at the document again, then back at Harrison's smug face. Something inside me shifted. Maybe it was the years of condescension finally reaching their limit. Maybe it was seeing these grown men so frustrated by something I could easily solve. Maybe it was just time for the truth to come out. Actually, Mr. Blackwell, I said quietly, this document is a legal framework for cultural preservation requirements in Montenegro. Article 3 specifically outlines the obligations for foreign investors to maintain the architectural integrity of UNESCO heritage sites. The room fell completely silent. You could hear the tick of Harrison's expensive Swiss clock on the wall. Harrison's smile faltered. What did you say? The document, sir. It's written in Montenegrin Cyrillic with Old Church Slavonic legal terminology. This section here, I pointed to a specific paragraph, discusses the requirement for a cultural impact assessment before any renovation work can begin on properties built before 1800. James Morrison stepped closer to the desk, his mouth slightly open. Are you reading this? Yes, sir. This paragraph discusses the penalties for non-compliance, substantial fines and potential seizure of properties if cultural heritage guidelines are violated. Harrison's face had gone from red to pale white. That's impossible. You're making this up. No, sir. Would you like me to continue? This section outlines the approval process for architectural modifications, which requires a panel of local historians and 3 government ministers to sign off on any changes. David Chen grabbed Harrison's arm. Harry, if she's right about any of this. She's not right. Harrison snapped, but I could see the doubt creeping into his eyes. She's a cleaning lady. She can't possibly. Mr. Blackwell, I interrupted gently, would you like me to translate the entire document for you? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Harrison stared at me with a mixture of disbelief, confusion, and growing panic. His billion-dollar deal was hanging in the balance, and the solution might be standing right in front of him, the same woman he'd been treating like an ignorant servant for years. This is insane, he muttered. Absolutely insane. Thomas Walsh, who had been quiet during the entire exchange, finally spoke up. Sir, if Maria can actually read this document. She can't. Harrison insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. It's impossible. Do you understand how ridiculous this sounds? The solution to our biggest business crisis is our cleaning lady. I stood there calmly, waiting for his decision. I knew that everything was about to change, for all of us. The carefully constructed walls I'd built around my true identity were about to come crashing down, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for the consequences. But after 15 years of invisibility, of being dismissed and underestimated, of watching these men struggle with problems I could solve with my eyes closed, I was finally ready to step out of the shadows. Harrison looked at the document, then at me, then back at the document. His empire was built on making quick decisions and calculated risks. This was the biggest gamble of his life. Fine, he said finally, his voice tight with desperation and disbelief. You want to play this game? I'll make you an offer that will prove how ridiculous this is. He stood up, his full height towering over me, and pointed a manicured finger in my direction. If you can translate this entire document accurately, and I mean perfectly, with all the legal terminology and technical details, I will give you everything. My entire fortune. Every penny. His partners gasped. James Morrison stepped forward. Harry, you can't be serious. Oh, I'm deadly serious, Harrison continued, his confidence returning as he convinced himself he was making a safe bet. Because there's no way, absolutely no way, that a cleaning lady from El Salvador can read ancient Montenegrin legal documents. This is going to be the easiest money I never lose. He laughed, that cold, dismissive laugh I'd heard him use countless times when he was certain of his superiority. But as I looked at him, then at the document, then back at his expectant face, I realized he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Because what Harrison Blackwell III didn't know was that Maria Santos, the invisible cleaning lady, was not who she appeared to be. And in about an hour, his entire world was about to be turned upside down. The tension in Harrison's office was suffocating. His 3 business partners stood frozen around his massive desk, staring at me as if I had just claimed I could fly. Thomas Walsh nervously loosened his collar, and even the usually composed James Morrison seemed shaken by the bizarre turn the morning had taken. Harrison paced behind his desk like a caged predator, his expensive Italian shoes clicking against the marble floor. He kept glancing at me with that mixture of amusement and disbelief that wealthy people reserve for situations they find utterly absurd. You realize what you just agreed to, don't you, Maria? Harrison's voice dripped with condescension. I'm offering you $4.7 billion, that's my net worth according to last month's Forbes estimate, if you can translate a document that has stumped every professional translator in New York City. Yes, sir. I understand. And when you fail, which you will, because this is completely ridiculous, you'll go back to cleaning my office and we'll never speak of this embarrassing episode again. Yes, sir. David's chin shifted uncomfortably. Harry, maybe we should think about this. What if she's legitimately studied languages? What if what, David? Harrison spun around to face him. What if our cleaning lady secretly has a PhD in ancient linguistics? What if she's been hiding her expertise in medieval Balkan dialects while scrubbing our toilets? Come on. But I could see something in David's eyes, he wasn't as certain as Harrison. Unlike his boss, David Chen had actually paid attention to me over the years. He'd noticed that I always organized his international contracts by country and language. He'd seen me correctly sort documents in Spanish, Portuguese, and Italian. He was beginning to suspect that maybe, just maybe, there was more to Maria Santos than met the eye. Mr. Blackwell, I said quietly, before I begin, I should mention that this translation will take approximately 3 hours to complete properly. The document is 47 pages long and contains complex legal terminology that requires careful attention to nuance. Harrison stopped pacing. 3 hours? You can estimate that just by looking at it. Yes, sir. And I'll need a computer with internet access to verify certain legal terms and ensure complete accuracy. James Morrison laughed nervously. She's really committing to this charade, isn't she? It's not a charade, sir, I replied calmly. Professional translation requires research and verification. I want to make sure you receive a perfect translation, given the stakes involved. The room fell silent again. My confidence was clearly unnerving them, and I could see Harrison's certainty beginning to waver. He had expected me to back down, to admit I was in over my head, to confirm his assumptions about my limitations. Fine, he said finally. Thomas, set up Maria in the conference room with a laptop. And get our legal team on standby. When she produces garbage, I want them to verify just how wrong her translation is. Sir, Thomas stammered, are you sure about this bet? I mean, your entire fortune. Harrison's laugh was sharp and bitter. Thomas, I'm not worried about losing my fortune to the cleaning lady. I'm worried about wasting 3 hours on this nonsense when we have a deadline to meet. But maybe this will teach everyone a valuable lesson about knowing your place. As Thomas led me to the conference room, I could hear Harrison already planning his victory speech. Gentlemen, when this is over, I want you to remember this moment. This is why we have professional qualifications, why we pay for expert services, why the world works the way it does. You can't just wish expertise into existence. The conference room was elegant and minimalist, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Thomas set up a laptop and nervously hovered nearby as I sat down at the polished table. Maria, he whispered, are you really sure about this? Mr. Blackwell. He doesn't like to lose. Ever. I understand, Thomas. Thank you for your concern. It's just, your job, if this goes badly. Thomas, my job was never really about cleaning, even though I've done it faithfully for 15 years. He looked puzzled but didn't press further. As he left the room, I could hear him speaking quietly into his phone. Yes, sir, she's starting now. No, sir, she seems completely confident. I don't understand it either. I opened the laptop and began examining the document more carefully. The Montenegro government had been thorough. This wasn't just a simple contract. It was a comprehensive framework that addressed cultural preservation, environmental impact, local employment requirements, profit sharing with communities, and maintenance of traditional architectural styles. As I began typing the translation, memories flooded back of my former life, the life that Maria Santos, cleaning lady, was never supposed to remember. 25 years ago, I had been Dr. Maria Santos Delgado, professor of comparative linguistics at Universidad Complutense Madrid, with specializations in Slavic languages and Byzantine legal traditions. I had published extensively on the evolution of legal language in the Balkans and had served as a consultant for international courts dealing with historical property disputes. I had been at the top of my academic career when my world collapsed. A political scandal involving my husband's construction company had destroyed our family's reputation and finances. When he died in a car accident while fleeing prosecution, I was left with nothing but debts and a tarnished name. The academic world that had once celebrated my expertise suddenly wanted nothing to do with the wife of a corrupt businessman. With no money and no future in Spain, I had emigrated to the United States with my teenage daughter, planning to rebuild our lives far from the scandal. But my Spanish credentials weren't recognized in America, and while I fought for years to get my qualifications validated, I needed to work. The cleaning job was supposed to be temporary, just until I could re-establish my career. But temporary became permanent when my daughter was diagnosed with leukemia. The medical bills consumed everything. The cleaning job that was supposed to last 6 months stretched into years, then into over a decade. My daughter survived, graduated from college, and now works as a teacher in California, never knowing the full extent of what I sacrificed to pay for her treatment. As I worked on the translation, I found myself smiling at the irony. Harrison thought he was making a safe bet, but he had just wagered his entire fortune with someone who had literally written academic papers on this exact type of legal document. The Montenegrin text was complex but familiar. The government was requiring foreign investors to commit to preserving not just the physical structures of historic buildings, but also their cultural context. They wanted guarantees that traditional craftspeople would be employed for renovations, that local materials would be used, and that the communities would benefit from tourism revenue. It was actually quite progressive and thoughtful, the kind of legislation that would preserve Montenegro's heritage while allowing for economic development. But it was also the kind of complexity that would cost Harrison hundreds of millions in additional expenses and project delays. After 2 hours, I heard voices in the hallway. Harrison was giving someone a tour, probably potential investors, and I could hear him joking about the amusing situation happening in his conference room. "You should see this, Robert," Harrison was saying to his guest. "My cleaning lady thinks she can translate complex legal documents. I've bet my entire fortune on her failure. It's the safest bet I've ever made." His guest laughed along, but I could hear uncertainty in the response. "Harry, what if you're wrong?" "Wrong? About a cleaning lady reading ancient Montenegrin?" "Robert, sometimes you need to trust in the natural order of things. People are what they are, and they know their limitations." As I neared the end of the translation, I began adding footnotes explaining cultural context and legal implications. This wasn't just a translation, it was a comprehensive analysis that would save Harrison's team months of research and cultural missteps. But as I worked, I realized something that Harrison hadn't considered. The document contained several clauses that would make his planned resort development either impossible or prohibitively expensive. The Montenegro government was essentially offering him a choice: become a genuine partner in preserving their heritage, or find another country to exploit. At exactly 3 hours, I finished. The translation was complete, with detailed explanations of legal implications and cultural requirements. I saved the document and printed a copy, then sat back and waited. A few minutes later, Harrison burst into the conference room with his partners trailing behind him. They were all trying to look casual, but I could see the tension in their faces. "Well, Maria," Harrison announced with theatrical confidence, "time's up. Let's see what you've produced for us." I handed him the printed translation. "Here you are, Mr. Blackwell. 47 pages translated, with footnotes explaining cultural context and legal implications." Harrison took the document and glanced at the first page. His smile began to fade almost immediately. This looks professional," he admitted reluctantly. James Morrison leaned over his shoulder, reading along. "Harry, look at this formatting. She's included section headers, subsection references, legal terminology explanations." "It's probably just gibberish made to look professional," Harrison insisted, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. David Chen was reading over the translation on the laptop screen. "Harry, this section here about UNESCO heritage requirements, this is exactly the kind of detail we've been missing. If it's accurate, we're looking at a completely different project than what we planned," Harrison finished, his face growing pale as he continued reading. Thomas Walsh, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up. "Sir, should we call our Montenegro contacts to verify the translation?" Harrison looked up from the document, his eyes meeting mine. For the first time since I'd known him, I saw uncertainty in his gaze. "Yes," he said quietly. "Call them immediately." As Thomas stepped outside to make the call, the room filled with tense silence. Harrison continued reading, his expression growing more troubled with each page. "Maria," he said finally, "where did you learn to format legal documents like this?" "Experience, Mr. Blackwell." "What kind of experience?" Before I could answer, Thomas returned, his face white as a sheet. "Sir," he announced, "I just spoke with our Montenegro contact. They confirmed the translation is completely accurate. In fact, they're impressed that we finally understand the requirements properly. They want to schedule a meeting for next week." The document slipped from Harrison's hands and scattered across the conference table. For the first time in 15 years, Harrison Blackwell III had no idea what to say. The silence in that conference room was unlike anything I had ever experienced. For successful businessmen, accustomed to controlling every situation, stood frozen around the mahogany table where my translation lay scattered like evidence of an impossible crime. Harrison's face had gone through several color changes, from confident pink to concerned white to a sickly green as the full implications of what had just happened began to sink in. His billion-dollar fortune, which he had wagered with the casual confidence of a man betting on gravity, was now legally mine. James Morrison was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. The translation is completely accurate? Thomas Walsh nodded numbly. Our Montenegro contact said it's the most comprehensive and nuanced translation they've seen. They want to know who our new linguistic consultant is. David Chen slowly sat down in one of the leather chairs, staring at me with a mixture of amazement and suspicion. Maria, I think you need to explain who you really are. All eyes turned to me. After 15 years of invisibility, of being dismissed and overlooked, of watching these men struggle with problems I could solve in my sleep, I was finally center stage. The moment felt surreal and terrifying and liberating all at once. My name is Dr. Maria Santos Delgado, I began, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was revealing. I have a PhD in comparative linguistics from Universidad Complutense Madrid, with postdoctoral specializations in Slavic languages and Byzantine legal traditions. Harrison's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Before coming to America, I continued, I was a full professor and published researcher. I specialized in exactly the type of legal documents you've been struggling with: historical property law in the Balkans, cultural preservation legislation, and international heritage treaties. That's impossible, Harrison finally managed to say. You're a cleaning lady. You've been cleaning my office for 15 years. Yes, I have. And I've done excellent work, haven't I? You've never had any complaints about my services. James Morrison leaned forward. Dr. Santos, why were you working as a cleaning lady if you have these qualifications? It was the question I had been dreading and expecting in equal measure. The truth about my fall from academic grace was complicated and painful, but after 15 years of hiding, I was ready to tell it. When I came to America 23 years ago, I was fleeing a scandal in Spain. My husband's construction company was involved in corruption charges. When he died in an accident while running from prosecution, I was left with debts, a ruined reputation, and a teenage daughter to raise. The room was completely quiet except for the sound of traffic far below on Fifth Avenue. My Spanish credentials weren't recognized here. I applied for validation through the proper channels, but the process was slow and expensive. Meanwhile, my daughter became seriously ill, leukemia. The medical bills were overwhelming. I could see understanding beginning to dawn in David Chen's eyes. He had always struck me as the most perceptive of the group. The cleaning job was supposed to be temporary, I continued. Just until I could get my credentials validated and find work in my field. But the bills kept coming, the treatment continued for years, and I couldn't afford to stop working even for a few weeks to complete the validation process. So you've been overqualified for 15 years? Thomas asked incredulously. Drastically overqualified. But my daughter is alive and healthy and graduated from college debt-free. She's a teacher now in California. She thinks I was a cleaning supervisor who worked her way up. She doesn't know the whole truth. Harrison had been standing motionless during my explanation, but now he began pacing again, this time with the frantic energy of a caged animal. This is insane, he muttered. Absolutely insane. You're telling me that for 15 years, I've had a linguistics professor cleaning my office? A linguistics professor who specialized in exactly the types of problems your company regularly faces with international deals, I confirmed. How many times? David Chen asked suddenly. I'm sorry? How many times have you listened to us struggling with translation issues, cultural barriers, international legal complications that you could have solved? I thought about it. Dozens. The Singapore real estate contract last year, you spent 3 months negotiating terms that violated local cultural requirements. The Dubai hotel project, you missed crucial Islamic finance law implications. The Prague acquisition, you never understood why the locals were protesting your renovation plans. You could have solved all of those? James Morrison looked sick. All of them. And many others. Harrison stopped pacing and whirled around to face me. Then why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you help us? It was a fair question, and I had thought about it many times over the years. Because you never asked, I said simply. More than that, you never saw me as a person capable of having solutions. To you, I was invisible. Just part of the furniture. But you could have spoken up, could I? Really? What would have happened if I had walked into your office 3 years ago and said, "Excuse me, Mr. Blackwell, but I couldn't help overhearing your discussion about medieval property law in Eastern Europe, and I think I can help because I wrote my dissertation on this exact topic?" Harrison opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. You would have thought I was mentally ill, I continued. Or lying. Or making fun of you. The idea that a cleaning lady could have expertise you needed would have been so absurd to you that you probably would have fired me. The truth of this hung in the air. We all knew I was right. Besides, I added, I was never just listening out of curiosity. I was working. Cleaning your offices, organizing your papers, doing the job you paid me to do. I overheard your business discussions, but that didn't make me a member of your team. Thomas Walsh had been quiet during this exchange, but now he spoke up. Dr. Santos, the Montenegro deal, given what you've translated, what are the real implications for our project? I had been waiting for this question. The translation had revealed some uncomfortable truths about Harrison's planned development. The project as currently planned is impossible, I said directly. The Montenegro government is requiring that any development of historic properties must employ traditional craftspeople, use traditional materials, and include substantial profit sharing with local communities. Your budget projections assume modern construction methods and minimal local employment. How impossible? Harrison asked, his voice tight. Your estimated profits would need to be reduced by approximately 60% to comply with the cultural preservation requirements. Additionally, the timeline would extend from 18 months to at least 4 years. The partners exchanged grim looks. David Chen was the first to voice what they were all thinking. The investors will never accept those terms. No, I agreed. But there's an alternative approach. Which is, pivot the entire concept. Instead of fighting the cultural preservation requirements, embrace them. Market the project as the world's premier authentic heritage resort experience. Partner genuinely with local communities. Use the traditional craftsmanship as a luxury selling point rather than seeing it as an obstacle. I could see the wheels turning in their minds. It was a completely different vision from their original plan, but it wasn't necessarily a bad one. The initial investment would be higher, I continued, but the long-term returns could actually exceed your original projections. Heritage tourism is a growing market, and authenticity commands premium prices. Harrison had been listening intently. You've thought about this. I've had time to think about it while translating. The Montenegro government isn't trying to block development, they're trying to ensure it's done respectfully. There's a difference. James Morrison was making notes. This would require a complete restructuring of our approach. Yes. And it would require someone who understands both the cultural requirements and the business implications to guide the process. The implication hung in the air. They needed expertise they had never known they had access to. Harrison finally sat down, looking older than I had ever seen him. Maria, Dr. Santos, I owe you an apology. You owe me $4.7 billion, actually. The reminder hit the room like a physical blow. In the excitement of discovering my true identity and discussing the Montenegro project, they had almost forgotten the original wager. About that, Harrison said carefully, surely we can work out some kind of arrangement? What kind of arrangement did you have in mind? Well, obviously I can't actually transfer my entire fortune to you. It would destroy the company, eliminate thousands of jobs, cause chaos in multiple markets. I had expected this. Wealthy people never honored impossible bets, they found ways to reframe them as negotiations. You're suggesting we modify the terms of your wager? I'm suggesting we find a solution that benefits everyone. I stood up and walked to the windows overlooking Central Park. After 15 years of being invisible, of being dismissed and underestimated, I finally had the power to change everything. The question was, what did I really want? I have a counter-proposal, I said finally, turning back to face them. I'm listening, Harrison said carefully. You keep your fortune. You keep your company. But you make me a full partner in all international projects going forward. Equal ownership stake, equal decision-making authority, and I handle all cultural and linguistic consulting. The room was silent as they processed this. Additionally, I continued, you establish a $50 million fund for adult education programs that help immigrants get their foreign credentials recognized in the United States. And you personally write letters of recommendation for 10 people per year who are working jobs beneath their qualifications due to bureaucratic barriers. That's very specific, David Chen observed. I've had 15 years to think about what needs to change. Harrison looked at his partners, then back at me. And in return? In return, you get to keep the empire you inherited, plus access to expertise that will make your international ventures far more successful. You also get to salvage your reputation from the catastrophic mistake you just made by betting your entire fortune on your own prejudices. The negotiation continued for another hour, with lawyers called in to draft preliminary agreements. In the end, we settled on a modified version of my proposal, a 25% stake in Blackwell International's foreign ventures, a $30 million education fund, and my immediate appointment as Vice President of International Cultural Affairs. But the most important change was something that couldn't be written into any contract. As word spread through the building about what had happened, I watched the invisible barriers that had separated me from the rest of the company begin to crumble. Suddenly, the executives who had never noticed me before were introducing themselves, asking about my background, treating me as a colleague rather than service staff. 3 months later, our Montenegro project became the flagship example of successful heritage tourism development in Eastern Europe. The profits exceeded original projections by 40%, and the model is now being replicated in 6 other countries. But more importantly, the education fund has helped 127 immigrants get their credentials recognized so far. Doctors are practicing medicine again, engineers are building bridges, teachers are in classrooms, and researchers are advancing science, all because someone finally recognized that a person's current job doesn't define their full potential. As for Harrison, he learned to see people differently. Not immediately, arrogance built over decades doesn't disappear overnight. But gradually, he began to notice the expertise hiding in plain sight throughout his organization. The security guard who speaks 4 languages now consults on Middle Eastern projects. The accountant with an art history degree helps evaluate cultural properties. The receptionist who emigrated from Brazil assists with South American ventures. The cleaning lady, meanwhile, no longer exists. Dr. Maria Santos Delgado is exactly who she was always meant to be, except now she has a corner office, a 6-figure salary, and the respect of colleagues who understand that brilliance comes in many forms, often disguised as service. Sometimes I still arrive at the office at 6 a.m., not to clean but to enjoy the quiet before the day begins. I look out at Central Park and think about invisible people, the immigrants driving taxis who used to be professors, the hotel housekeepers who were once nurses, the restaurant workers who held government positions in their home countries. They're all still out there, hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to see their true value. I was lucky enough to have my moment of revelation forced upon me by an arrogant millionaire's impossible wager. But luck shouldn't be required for recognition. That's the real work still to be done. Warning: legal disclaimer: this story is entirely fictional and created for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, real events, or real institutions is purely coincidental. The elements concerning business dealings and international negotiations are simplified for narrative purposes.